Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's DCRI Research Conference. It's a real pleasure to introduce Bruce Burnett, Director of Regulatory Affairs here within DCRI and DTMI. Dr. Burnett, we found out we have a lot in common and didn't know that till just now. We went to the same college in San Diego, studied in the same department, so he's did a degree in chemistry at University of California, San Diego, prior to going to MIT for his PhD and staying at Harvard for a postdoc in genetics. Then he's had a very interesting career in industry for several decades, and now has tremendous expertise in regulatory affairs. Very complicated field, obviously very important to DCRI. And his presentation was set up by Dr. Becker, who worked with Dr. Burnett on an important grant submission and really found out how much he needed to know about regulatory affairs, but didn't, and thought it would be very helpful for the entire group to hear. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Burnett.
So we'll leave the first slide up for those who are still needing to get CME credit for a moment. And it comes at the end, so if you forget. I've seen a nice large crowd and actually seen a lot of familiar faces. I was wondering if the rest of you were sentenced to an hour of quality and regulatory. So I appreciate you coming, and hopefully this will be instructive. So when as Abdul said, I was asked by Dr. Becker when I had responsibility with DTMI Regulatory Affairs. Now I have the opportunity to work with Kay Fenton, QARC, and Claire Motti in Regulatory Services. So this talk has now been expanded to include those groups, as well as we wanted to talk a little bit, just a few slides about clinical trials QA, quality assurance, because they do also interact with us on the university side. So here's where we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the QARC, sort of what they do, what their objectives are. Again, this is meant to be kind of explain to everyone, here are services here at DCRI and Duke and how you might interact with them, and hopefully in a positive way. I was telling Abdul that I had started off with a black tie because I thought that most people thought people in regulatory are very black and white, and so I thought I would, but my wife thought that was a pretty down-looking presentation, so she made me change to the red tie. So I do take cues from people that are important. So another group that we want to talk about is the QA group that oversees the Robertson clinical trial cell therapy program, mainly because that group really became a major group when FDA granted or approved Joanne Kurtzberg's cord blood product. So we have a very fully functional QA group to oversee that process. As I mentioned, Claire Motti's Regulatory Services at DCRI, the group that I had come to Duke to see when Deborah hired me. I have a whole story about what I thought she was asking me to do and what ended up happening, but maybe that's another day. Yeah, I think everybody's probably had that experience. And also the clinical trials, and I just have a few slides from CTQA just to kind of put that into perspective. So let's talk about QARC. I think most people in DCRI know very well QARC. Maybe sometimes you've met, maybe not on the most positive situations, but at the same time, I think we need really look at the resources that this group brings to really ensure that DCRI maintains the quality systems and ensures that we're maintaining regulatory compliance. I had another story when I first came with Deborah hired, and she said, well, what's the name of the group? And I said, well, Regulatory Affairs. And I was being introduced by someone to a senior person in the School of Medicine, and they said, Regulatory Affairs, isn't that compliance? And I said, no. And Deborah had maintained that, if we were going to interact well with investigators, we had to make sure that they didn't feel that we were someone that they needed to avoid. And so I said, no, we're not compliance. Hopefully you'll become compliant by interacting with us. And she said, I don't know, this still makes me nervous. And I said, so think of cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. We're good cholesterol. And if that will help you interact with us in a more positive way. So I think that's helped some people understand regulatory affairs a little bit better. Anyway, regulatory compliance has it in the title, so hopefully people will understand it's by maintaining the systems that you have in place that you will ensure that you will be compliant with the regulations. So what are the responsibilities? I think most people know QARC for their audit function, both internally and externally. They do a fair amount. We'll have a slide about kind of the level that they do. But QARC will also qualify vendors for use by DCRI on any of the projects that might utilize an outside vendor. They also prepare and host for external sponsor audits as well as FDA if they come to DCRI. They also manage the quality system here. Right now it's a paper system, but eventually we'll move to an electronic document management system, which I think will facilitate other functional areas to have electronic document management for their quality systems, which I think will really be very helpful. There is another entity, the DCRI Executive Quality Council, and it's a group that has members from multiple functional areas, which really is designed to look at both cross-functional as well as areas that might have issues across DCRI. So again, another important group. And also, we want everybody to know that from a QARC perspective, that they're available for consultation. If you had issues related to your own functional area, related to quality or regulatory, this is a group that you could go to without feeling that somehow it's going to come back to bite you. So hopefully this talk today will help people understand better about QARC. So what's the approach that QARC takes? So this idea of state of control, and if you were in the pharmaceutical world and thinking about manufacturing, state of control is that the systems that you have in place, the systems that you have explained to regulatory agencies, maintaining the specifications, and that your manufacturing stays in that state of control. Well, we can have the same thing in other areas as well. So state of control means that you're following the systems that you have in place, whether they be SOPs or processes. And so really what QARC would like to do is to ensure that that's what you're doing. So if they come in to audit you, they're really looking to see, are you doing what you're saying you're doing? And that's really one of the major objectives of an audit. Also the idea of risk management. You can't look at everything, and what you want to do is make sure that the things that you spend time on are the high risk or the high impact items. So this is something that you see the FDA doing with all of their inspections, and it's going across multiple industries, which is this idea that you spend time on things that matter and that have consequences. Now one mechanism, and it's used very frequently within the pharmaceutical world, is this idea of CAPAs, this corrective action, preventive action. And often if you've had an audit from an external sponsor, this may be something that you will see as part of your audit findings, is that you will have a CAPA. You will have to respond to the observations, and how are you going to put into place to prevent that from happening or correct it. So again, a very important mechanism for ensuring that you improve the systems that you have in place. The other thing that QARC really wants to do is to alert DCRI and current and projected regulations that might impact groups, projects here at Duke. And also, as I mentioned before, to facilitate this Executive Quality Council, which again is sort of a cross-functional area that covers quality issues across DCRI. So who is QARC, besides them sitting in the back all smiling at me, which gives me great comfort? And also Reza, of course. So they actually are very, very highly skilled, and this is really very important for when people do come and do your audit. These are really very, very experienced professionals anyway, as much as anything that you would see if you had someone, an external sponsor, a Novartis or a GSK coming to look at a functional area. So the kind of observations and the kind of comments that you would get from a QARC audit really should be taken very much to heart, and it really is intended to build and to improve upon the systems that you have in place. So as I said, these are skills and attainments showing that they're very highly professional in the area that they've been working in. This is just a graph, and then we're in the next slide kind of enumerates so that you don't have to try to figure out what each bar at what height it is. So here's the kind of a rolling average over several years. As you can see, there's been an increase in vendor audits. I think, and this may be a question as DCRI moves forward, is that, do you go forward with sort of a preferred vendor approach, or do you go forward with the vendor of the day kind of approach? And each one will have benefits but at the same time, there's also a consequence to adding multiple vendors to any vendor list that you might use as part of a project. And so the number of vendor audits is a large number. The site audits, I think, is a representative number for the different sites that DCRI might use as part of a project. Sponsor audits is also a reflection of people coming here and looking at DCRI as a potential partner in a project. So a large number of projects of which, large number of audits of which QARC has a very close responsibility in terms of overseeing either as the auditor or as representing DCRI with someone else auditing DCRI. We also wanted to end our little talk about QARC with a couple of highlights where we really kind of show the benefits of a function like this internal to a big entity like DCRI. So the meropenem study was a study, I think, done with the PTN, the Pediatric Trials Network. I'm getting the nod in the back, so that was the right choice. So this was an antibiotic where they would like to get more pediatric labeling. If people have not been aware of sort of the focus, Danny must have given the PTN seminar, maybe? Anyway, so the PTN was formed primarily to address an issue, which is that for many drugs that were approved over the last 20 or 30 years, there was no requirement to do pediatric studies. This is now a requirement for new drugs being approved. Obviously, for a branded company that has lost its exclusivity due to patent no longer applying, there's no incentive for them to do pediatric studies, even though the FDA, had it been towards the end of the patent, they could have given a patent extension. But for those that are completely generic, there has been not a financial incentive to do these pediatric studies. So NIH funded the PTN to do these pediatric studies to allow information in the label. And for those who are not familiar with how information gets in the label, it still is owned by the branded company, even if the drug is generic. So this study would have to be done, and then the negotiation with the data and the FDA and the branded company would hopefully get that information in the label. So this is the objective of the PTN, and for this particular study, this was one of the studies where QARC played an important role, which was that some of the data that was being collected or tested was at risk because of the FDA finding issues with the laboratory doing the testing. QARC was able to work to make sure that the samples had been dealt with properly, the testing data either, I'm not sure, was it repeated or, this is where I needed to have a little bit more help. It was repeated, and therefore the data was then able to be submitted to the FDA, and the data was accepted, and now you have that pediatric labeling in that particular label for this particular antibiotic. So again, a good success story, and I think Kathy was given an award at the town hall last week. I was hoping to go to it, but somehow the NCAA switched it from 12 to 11, and I had a conflict, so I wasn't able to be it. Not that I was going to, I had another meeting at 12. Another one was the record study, which I think everybody who watched the advisory committee meeting on TV, it was a very high stakes issue, the whole data of whether Avandia caused cardiovascular events and the re-adjudication that was done here at Duke. So it was recognized that there would be very close scrutiny on this particular protocol and all the studies, all the components in this study, and so QARC did work very closely with the team, and I think the outcome was very positive in all the data. There was no issues with the data, and I think this was, again, a very good working relationship between QARC and, in this case, Ken Mahaffey, who was up there explaining how the study was performed, and so therefore, again, a good outcome for working closely with QARC. So that's QARC, and now I want to talk a little bit about the clinical affairs, quality assurance group at CT Squared. Again, the primary focus of this group, even though they have multiple customers, has been formed to support an FDA-approved product. And if people who haven't interacted with Joanne and the group, you will see that things really are at a much higher level. I think anybody who's been in research, and Joanne obviously has had a very long record of producing very high quality product here, but it was an investigational product. And when the FDA asked that all of these cord blood banks that made cord blood units get FDA approved, the bar was raised considerably. And as part of that, there was a need to form a very comprehensive quality assurance group that would be responsible for overseeing the manufacturing as well as the release. And so this group was formed. Actually, the entity that is the financial entity is the School of Medicine. So originally when the BLA went in, Dean Andrews actually signed the submission. But since that time, our group has supported with Amanda Parrish here, supporting that submission and the product. But Doris here was brought in to really set up a quality assurance group that would oversee all the components that's necessary for an FDA-approved product. So besides the CCBB and its FDA-approved product, there is the stem cell lab, which is also supported through this particular entity. The tissue culture facility, if people haven't seen that on the 9th floor, is a very, very sophisticated tissue culture facility. I mean, as good as you would see in industry, really is a beautiful facility, and I think you'll see more products come out of that facility in the future, and well as the adult and pediatric bone marrow transplant programs are supported by Doris's QA group. This is the kind of the nuts and bolts of a GMP, so you have to ensure that all your supplies, all your materials, some of this can be very mundane, but it's very critical. We had a pre-approval audit by FDA. This was with 4 individuals over a week. We also had a second, a post-approval audit already, where again, 2 individuals came in spending a week. So they look at every system that you have in place, and really what they're looking for are these kind of systems that you do have the control over all the materials that would go into your product. And so while some of these things may be mundane, but they're very, very important, especially when you have, as I said, an FDA-approved product. Inventory management, vendor qualification, we do have vendors that we work with, primarily testing facilities. Document management, this is a system that we have brought in for this particular one, and it has gone through, as I said, a couple of FDA audits, so we know that it's very well accepted and therefore very compliant. Another thing that you have to do, again, we talked about a state of control. You will have deviations, and so you need to make sure that you investigate all of those deviations and ensure that you can understand the consequences. So this is, event management is a very important part and something that the FDA, every time they come, will look at. QA by regulation has to be the one that actually releases product. So even though Joanne, as the medical director, would feel very strongly that she would only release a quality product to a transplant center, it also requires by regulation that QA be the final sign-off, and that is an independent function, independent of this case operations or the medical manager. So QA release and approval, equipment management, anything to do with the equipment in the facility. You have probably a lot more, and I'm not sure how many groups here have spent any time working with equipment where you have to do an installation qualification, operation qualification, performance qualification. All these are things that are required for equipment. You have to make sure that the equipment is calibrated, et cetera. So this is a tremendous amount of work and a lot of just details that have to be overseen. And this is what a classic QA function within the pharmaceutical industry has as a responsibility. Also, environmental monitoring. There is something called classified air for most GMP. This is not considered classified for this particular manufacturing because it's essentially a closed system. But at the same time, you have to ensure that the environment that you're working in does have appropriate quality. It doesn't just have to meet a certain specification, which is the only difference. We maintain metrics. It's the idea that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So Joanne and Doris have worked together to come up with metrics that we can look at over time and look for trends, et cetera. In our master control, which is the document management system, we have about 120 people utilize it both here at Duke and also external collection sites for cord blood. The total SOPs are about 1,000 that we have in here. And again, what you find as you get into the FDA-approved world, the number of SOPs have a life of their own. They multiply over time. But again, what you like to do is because you really like to have granular, you don't want to have very broad SOPs that cover multiple things. And these tend to be very detailed. The FDA does look at them and ensure that they seem to have the appropriate level of detail. Probably because we were an academic center, we actually were required to submit most of the SOPs as part of the BLA. If you were in the traditional pharmaceutical world, this would not be a requirement. But now, I think their whole point was they wanted the SOPs that we have here at Duke to be the appropriate level of detail, and so we had a very close scrutiny. So all these are in our system, and so therefore it's a very important part of maintaining both the versions as well as people to make sure that they're trained on these SOPs. Here's kind of the level of work that we have with QA, with CT squared QA. So in 2013, so products are released both from the cord blood unit, the cord blood product was approved in October 2012. That's right. It seems like yesterday, but 2012. And so any unit manufactured after October 2012 is considered a licensed unit. The same process was used prior to that, are being released under the IND. And this was an arrangement that the FDA worked out with all the cord blood facilities that are going through the FDA approval process. So the total number of products released to the registry, which is how transplant centers can find cord blood units for a match. So this is what Duke puts out. I think there's about 30,000 units total in our system, but this is what was released in 2013. 670 were distributed, of which only 5 were licensed product. And not because there's anything issue. It's with time. There's just a smaller number of the total number of units that Duke has put into the registry. I think people do recognize that the licensed units maybe seemingly have a higher quality, and we'll see that over time. But at the same time, there's just a smaller percentage of the total units are licensed product as opposed to the vast number that were manufactured before October 2012. So that's why the number differences. And the number in products released to the registry is a little bit smaller by month. For 20, we had made some manufacturing changes. And again, for an FDA-approved process, changing any component of it, you're required to get FDA approval before you can introduce the change. So we've had to change the bag that the cord blood unit is actually processed in and then frozen. And that bag, that whole process of going through and changing to that bag has to get FDA approval before those units can be processed, sent to the registry. So the number is smaller because we've had a large backlog for a couple of months while the FDA looked at this change. Quality assurance in CT squared is very much like QARC. A big part is auditing to ensure that you have the number of, that all the systems are working as expected. So they do a lot of internal audits. They do a fair number of vendor audits as well. In this case, they've only done 1 this year, but we've had several times where we've worked with our testing facilities. So those were audited. The validation number is a large number, and that's because any change requires some type of validation to ensure that the change, you understand the change and that the process is still acceptable. And we're also doing additional validations as additional testing procedures come on board. So this is a large number, and it's something that I think anybody who works in this kind of regulated area is a bit surprised how much this goes on, but it's still an important part to ensure that the data that you're going to get or the process that you're using is appropriate and it has the appropriate quality, et cetera. This is just a couple things that we're working on. It really isn't too important. Just that, again, much of what we do relates to oversight of the process. So expanding the system to include CAPAs, et cetera, is really some of the things. All the training records are online. So this will facilitate inspections going forward. So now we go to Claire Motti and regulatory services. I had a chance to work with Claire very early, actually even before I came to Duke. Met her through one of the local regulatory groups here. And so I have always known about regulatory affair, the sort of the I&D component, what is called the investigational applications. What was very interesting to me was that the regulatory service actually has a very broad scope of services, and what was very interesting to me was to find about all of these different ones. So Rose, and I'm going to talk about each one individually here. So Rose Beachy, who oversees really the I&D support for DCRI. We have Simona Francis, who is our sort of her human subject protection representative for DCRI as a CRU. This is the different clinical research units within the School of Medicine, and so therefore Simona serves in that role for DCRI. Denise Sturdy is a lawyer by training, and she does analyses, again, for regulatory intelligence and the implications for DCRI, and we'll have a chance to look a little bit about what she does. And Jane Hickman on outreach and how can some of the things that could impact DCRI as a whole be communicated to DCRI. And so let's go and look at each one of those a little bit more closely. So again, this is the part that I knew, and I had worked with Claire's group quite often. This was working on the I&Ds or regulatory agencies. Rose works with David, and they have, I think, asked for a little statistics. There's about 17 I&Ds, and we talked about the PTN earlier. This is what's driving a lot of the I&Ds, where before, many of the studies that were brought into DCRI were NIH-funded projects, and many of those studies didn't require an I&D with the FDA. They were either an approved product that was used off-label in an investigational manner, but didn't rise to the level that required an I&D. But many of the studies, or all the studies that the PTN, by definition, you want to have an I&D because your objective is actually to change the label. So all of the studies that Danny has been and the PTN have been doing at I&Ds, and this is a big part of what regulatory investigational applications is responsible for. They also interact with the FDA. They have pre-IND meetings, et cetera. So this is another important component. And if you counted all the meetings where there might be discussions about data, this would be an even larger number, because I think many of the data that's been submitted to the FDA has required a meeting to discuss that. And this is something that Claire's group would help set up. So again, a very active group, and driven in many cases because of the PTN. Again, it's human subject protection. So all of the clinical research units within the School of Medicine will have someone who is responsible for this. In this case, this person resides within Claire's group. They have the functions which I think are very familiar for people who are doing clinical research. You have to interact with the Duke IRB, the School of Medicine Research Integrity Office. There's also a requirement that someone sort of authorize protocols that go to the IRB. I think this is sort of a responsibility to ensure that the appropriate quality when it's submitted to the IRB. They also support the faculty who may have not worked with the IRB and done the protocol submissions. So this is, again, it's electronic, and there may be some nuances to it that would be facilitated, and this is what Simona is responsible for. And they also look at informed consents to ensure that all the required elements are present. So again, an important role just to make sure that the process moves smoothly with faculty here at DCRI. Here, this was a new function, a very interesting one. I had a chance to go online to look at. There's a link to the Regulatory Services intranet site, which is actually very comprehensive, and this has been, again, a learning experience for me. So again, one of the functions here is to gather information about clinical research, about guidances, et cetera, and provide summaries that hopefully go to the people who might be impacted by these new guidances or regulations. She also, because of her legal training, was also looking at court decisions and how that might impact potential either current or future projects at DCRI. So again, a very interesting thing, and you can see a lot of this information on the intranet site. I mentioned this, so another aspect is to develop policies, SOPs, guidelines on research topics that might, again, impact DCRI. Another function is the outreach. So you have all of this information that we have internally. How do we can get this information out to both the broader DCRI and also investigators here at Duke? So one of the entities that lives at Duke is this Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, which is between Duke and the FDA. And really it's intended to, how can we make improvements in the clinical research process? And so many of the outcomes of that research are part of Claire's group is to help disseminate that information so that people can utilize it and hopefully make their clinical trials more efficient. One of the ideas is to build this idea of quality and scientific. Many of the things that you see in the pharmaceutical world, this quality by design, it really is a way of thinking about every aspect of your process, and it can apply not just to manufacturing but also to clinical research. And this idea of focus what matters, this is the same kind of idea behind risk management. Again, you want to work on the things that have the highest consequence, and therefore you don't have time to look at everything, so work on the things that matters. Again, a very good point to think about when you're looking at any process here at DCRI. Here is the first bullet is the regulatory. Claire, I may be wrong. Are you on the front page or do you have to search for it? Are you a link?
Our internet page is a link on the front page.
Oh, see, well that makes life, I'll have to learn where that is. I kept searching around to find it. So and in it you'll find draft guidances as they come out. And again, what they're trying to do is that of all the information that's coming out of FDA and other regulatory agencies, they're trying to distill it down to those guidances that really impact DCRI. So it's a very efficient way if you just to go there and to see what guidances are available and how they might impact your work. And they also have about research abroad. So they have for people who have projects that might have clinical studies in countries outside the US, this is another source of information about what might be the requirements. Even if you are working with an external vendor, it would help for you to know what will be the expectations in terms of the information that you will need to provide. And the final point here is that they also, many times the FDA asks for comments on guidances, et cetera. So Claire's group has taken on to try to solicit people within the DCRI if they want to make a comment on a particular guidance and get those comments as part of the FDA's review before they put out the final rule. So this was going to be where I started the talk if things hadn't changed, and I had now involved with QARC and DCRI, Reg Services. So our group for the longest time was myself, Aaron, Yelena, and Amanda, and Audrey as our admin. One of the things we were able to hire Amanda was because of the BLA, and so and I think it works well is that essentially Joanne's group supported Amanda for 3 years during that whole BLA process. So her support came there, and Deborah allowed us to add an extra resource. So Deborah has a way, if we can find the money, we're allowed to hire people. So now I go out. So now we've had another chance. So we just hired Preeti Chuga, who is everybody here has a Duke connection. They've either here as a Duke graduate or they've done a Duke postdoc, except me. But I do support Duke in all things. In fact, when I first came down to North Carolina to work at a small pharmaceutical company, someone asked me, it's probably the first week, so who do you like, UNC or Duke? And I said, well, I like them both. And they said, oh, that's not possible. You're not allowed to like UNC and Duke. And in fact, because I couldn't choose, people didn't trust me. You know, you can't trust someone who can't choose between one or the other teams. Anyway, so everybody here has a connection with Duke, and so Preeti was our hire, which just came in March, and she's going to support the Duke Human Vaccine Institute. So for people who are not familiar, Bart Haynes has a project where he's going to do multiple protein components that hopefully will induce broadly neutralizing antibodies. So this is a very exciting study. This is an outcome of a tremendous amount of years of research and seeing people who spontaneously induce broadly neutralizing antibodies for HIV. And so they've looked at the people as they've done it, and they've seen the protein structure of a certain envelope protein and how it's changed over time and how it's induced this production of a broadly neutralizing antibody. So this project will actually produce 4 different proteins that will be given and hopefully will induce the production of an antibody that will be broadly neutralizing. So this is a very exciting project. It's going to require minimally 4 INDs. There's 4 clinical trials. It's going to be a tremendous amount of work, and so DHVI felt that they would need a full FTE to support from the regulatory side, and they were willing to support it in our group, and so Preeti is here for that. Hopefully she'll have some time to do some of the other things that we do, because that's a lot of fun as well. But anyway, so because of all the time that we're now committing to these and other projects, we were able to hire another person coming in, and she starts, this is Erica Johnson, and she will start in April. So again, the idea here is that most of these groups are external groups to DTMI are supporting someone within our group, and we will prioritize that work for them. So, and I think it's worked very well to date. So we have a website, and so where you can go there. There's lots of information there, either about our services, but also about the IND and IDE process. And hopefully that's a resource mainly for you to now go and contact us. We provide services really in 4 main areas. So this idea that early regulatory strategy, which is what is, you have a process, you have a project, you have a drug or a biologic, what does it take, or a device, what does it take to get it to the next stage? And so that's where we interact with investigators, and it's been a good point. And we've had probably over 20 meetings, or at least 20 meetings with FDA on various projects internal with Duke. I think it's a very good process, because again, you can get very specific responses to questions that you might have to really move your research to a point where it's either now more likely to get a grant or some other aspect. So again, a very valuable process that we are there to help. And another thing that Deborah and Rob did when they started the group is, do we charge for the services? And so they decided very early on that they really wanted to have no barrier between investigator coming to us and charging and some fee. So there was no charge. And I remember one of the very first things I did, I was giving a talk to a group of investigators, and I said, and the best thing is that our services are free. And so someone raised their hand and they say, okay, I hear you're free, but what is the real cost? And they insisted, they asked me several times, what is the real cost? And I think it's hard sometimes. I know that, we have to worry, but I think, within the DTMI for this particular service, there is no cost. And really, we do happily accept, as with Amanda and Preeti, that if a functional area wants to support an FTE, of course we accept it. But we don't want to have an investigator with critical regulatory questions or quality questions to feel that they don't have a resource because they didn't put money in their grant or something like this. So that's one of the points. So we meet early with these folks and hopefully help them with their regulatory strategy. We also, if they're at the point where they have a compound that they need to do preclinical testing, we can help them understand the requirements for that, for what would be called IND enabling studies. And we also have the ability to do studies here at Duke, and in some cases we're also helping in that way. Gmp Manufacturing, there's a lot of things, and this was actually my first formal interaction with DCRI, was to actually review where a project has required manufacturing to be done, whether it's over-encapsulation or some other formulation that might be done. Previously, the project leaders felt a little bit uncomfortable signing certificates of analysis and saying this is something that is acceptable for use in a clinical trial. By my background in QA, I now review those batch records, sign the CBAs. If there's any deviations, I can sign those and assess whether there are impact on the product. So this is something that we are able to provide to DCRI, and that was really my first interaction with DCRI, was to serve in that function. And also, probably our biggest service over time has been helping investigators with INDs or IDEs, investigational device exemptions, or in this case, the BLA, which was a very long project. So we have about, there's probably over 100 INDs held at Duke by investigators, maybe about 80 investigators holding those INDs. And we have we're happy to teach you how to fish, But if you don't want to learn, we'll be happy to give you a fish, the mechanism. So some people are very interested, and they have people in their group who are very excited about learning more about regulatory, and we're happy to help that person. And that, of course, longer term makes less time for us. But at the same time, we also understand that many investigators are very pressed for time, and just getting the document out, whether it be an initial IND or an annual report, is the key. So our group helps in both of those cases. So I talked a little bit. So these are the kind of things that we do with early regulatory strategy. Another thing I'd like to point out in that last text is that we've provided a fair amount of text for grants. If there's a translational component that you need to identify, that possibly you might have a meeting with the FDA or something else like this, or a letter of support saying when we get to that point, we do have this resource that we can draw upon. So we're happy to serve in both those cases, either to provide information or text for a grant or a letter of support. As I mentioned before about the preclinical testing, we do help investigators with studies at Duke, which is somewhat unique. We have both John Norton and Randall, can't think of his last name, both have served as study directors in the GLP world. And so for a couple of studies, right now Dr. Bigner has a GLP study that's going on that we've talked with the FDA. We'll support his investigational product going into an IND later this year. So again, for sometimes this might be the best way, because again, for people who have ever looked at the cost of GLP studies, they're very expensive. And so if it's possible we could do it at Duke, then this is maybe the best way to move that project forward. This is, as I mentioned, an area that we've done a lot of work on. We've not only have we helped in the case where we were helping people at Duke, at DCRI with products that were manufactured either over encapsulation. We've actually had a number of investigators who actually manufacture here at Duke. So they have primarily this is in the cell therapy area. They're doing some manipulation in their laboratory. We also worked when Wesley Burks was here. He had an oral immunotherapy product, which was various nuts powder that he would give to individuals. We were helping him understand that that actually is a drug from a regulatory sense, and so all that went under an IND, actually multiple INDs, but his manufacturing also had to be sort of upgraded in recognition that this was not just a food study, but actually a drug study. And so we helped them set up their manufacturing with batch records and appropriate systems to put in place so that they knew that they were consistently giving the same material each time for their patients. And I mentioned I do provide QA batch record review for DCRI. This is was our first starting area. I felt at first, I know probably this is dating myself, but there used to be a commercial called the Maytag Repairman who sat waiting for the call, and that was me when I first came here. People didn't know what regulatory affairs was, plus I don't think anybody knew how to find you. So I used to go around, felt like a lawyer chasing the ambulance. I'd go to investigational seminars and I'd come up and I'd say, I'm a regulatory affairs, I'd love to help if you can. They're like, they kind of give you the eye. And I remember the first person who called and they said, well, I'd like to set up a time to meet with you. And I said, I'm available right now. And those days are gone now, but happily, but it was a fun time to when we were starting the group. But IND support really is our biggest area. We have maybe, I think it's probably 80 to 100 submissions a year. So we're putting out a submission a couple submissions every week on average. And again, many of these ones that may have a very little bit of work just to help the investigator, or this may require months and months of work that requires to get a submission out if it's a full IND. But in any case, that's really an area that we really try to help investigators. So one thing that I also didn't understand coming from a pharmaceutical world, which was that people came to work every day to think about that project. And when I came to Duke, I found an investigator would come, they would get all excited, you would work really like crazy, and then all of a sudden they disappear because they were rounding, they were writing grants, they had to write a paper. And so it was a very kind of schizophrenic time where you had to be available when they were available. And once you kind of understand that, you can kind of get into that mode of working. But at first it was very disconcerting, which is that you were just about to do something and then radio silence. But now we understand that everybody's very, very busy, and this is something that they're doing along with a lot of other things. So I think that's one thing that we can do as a service, is that we can keep these projects moving forward even when investigators aren't available to work on it. So I think that's been a big assistance to folks here. One other thing is that we, working with John Sunday and the DCRU, is that there was a very big project coming in, but they had, their IND had been submitted electronically. And for those who, for the FDA, once you made any submission electronically, all subsequent submissions have to be submitted electronically. You can't sort of mix and match. So this project did have an IND that was already submitted. So we actually had that resource. We changed because like so many times, someone buys the software and then they say they're going to support it and then they decide not to support it. So we have changed. We do have the capability of doing electronic submissions. I think now as we work closer with Claire's group, that her group will adopt this, because this is it's a Duke resource, and so if there are projects external to DCRI where having the capability to do electronic submissions is an important component, then that will be something that we can add here as well. So that's something that I think as going forward, one of the reasons that also was driving to have the capability of electronic submissions is the fact that commercial products will all be required, that all the submissions will have to be electronic in something called the Common Technical Document format. They have waived that for academic investigators just because of they know the resources that would be required for each of these individuals to somehow have the capability to do electronic submissions. But we have the cord blood product, and we also now have the capability for any investigator if they wanted to go electronic. So that's something that hopefully we will do more and more in the coming years. So the last couple of slides was just to kind of close the loop on what are all the quality and regulatory components that might impact you here at DCRI and the School of Medicine. So CTQA, this is a group that actually reports into the Board of Trustees. They have sort of a different mandate other than what you see QARC, which is served to help support DCRI. They're part of the University Compliance section of the Duke and Ethics Compliance Office. They report to the Chief Compliance Officer, which is Tina Tyson, and they have 3 senior auditors, 1 compliance auditor. One of the things so their scope of work is that they're looking at your IRB approved protocol, and they're really doing the kind of audit which is just to say, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? They also have there's a financial component of their review, but I'm focusing only on the protocol end of things, compliance with ICH guidelines, compliance with human subject research. So I think for people who've gone through that, it feels a little bit maybe more tension than you might have with CTQA, but I think maybe the outcomes are a little bit higher because, again, these results are submitted to the Board of Trustees, and it's a very highly visible. And so how could you be audited? I did check with them, and some of the projects here at DCRI have been audited by CTQA. So it could be because the IRB has seen something of concern, and so therefore they're asking CTQA to look at. Your department may, for whatever reason, ask to have this particular protocol reviewed. The School of Medicine may have it. Again, it could be for all the good reasons, just because it's a very visible project, or it could be one because there's been problems. So either way, the CTQA might be involved. They focus primarily on some systems where there's no external monitoring. So these are a lot of PI-initiated protocols. They do try to check on most of those that are going here at Duke. And phase 1 and phase 2 studies are part of their algorithm, how they choose. I mentioned that. So also studies that have a high subject accrual, people who have patients who are at risk or vulnerable, and potentially if there was some allegation of of a problem in a study would be another reason that the CTQA might choose your protocol for review. So that was a whirlwind discussion about all things quality and regulatory, and I even got it so that Deborah stayed right to the end, so that's always a good thing. We can take questions, and again, if there are those who are looking for CME credit, we'll leave the slide up here. Yes, Doc.
Just a comment on the CTQA audit.
Yep.
In addition to the ones that you listed, departments and institutes are audited triennially every 3 years with random audits of protocols and investigators done there. So there's no for cause or anything like that.
You could just be unlucky with what you're saying.
Our second round of that was done sometime earlier this year.
Thanks for a wonderful overview. Quick question.
Sure.
You covered in great detail regulatory issues related to pharma,
Yep.
devices, cellular-based therapies. Sort of an evolving space in digital health-based interventions, so to speak.
We haven't had really any interactions with any of that aspect, so I can't tell you what might be occurring in that space.
Any other questions? Burnett? Great, well, thank you very much for